Greetings and welcome to another series of weekly devotionals where we take a look at one of the lectionary readings for this upcoming Sunday and offer some thoughts for reflection. And this week we're going to look at sort of a challenging book in the lexicon, the book of the prophet Daniel, and some verses in chapter 7 of that book that deal with Daniel's image of God and of heaven as he prophesies to the people of Israel. I remember when the movie Oh God came out in the 1970s. It starred the comedian George Burns as God, and it was sort of kind of humorous and shocking to think of God as somebody that looks like George Burns. Later in the 90s, if you may remember, the movie Bruce Almighty came out, and God was portrayed by Morgan Freeman. And even more recently than that, in the movie The Shack, the book in the movie The Shack, God, the creator, was portrayed, imaged as sort of a heavy-set African-American woman, which really might push the boundaries of our imagination and theological understandings. In the book of the prophet Daniel, he offers sort of a traditional, what we might think of as a traditional image of God. He says, or writes, "As I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one took his throne. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool." And most people growing up, if you're my age, you probably thought of God as this old white dude with a long white beard sitting on a throne with flowing robes, sort of like a king. That's the sort of traditional image. But as scholars point out, that image of an emperor or a colonizing king or a conquering king, that was something that the people of Israel needed. They needed to imagine God as that sort of image because of their history of being on the unfortunate end of being conquered and oppressed unjustly by so many emperors, by so many colonizing kings. The Egyptians and then the Assyrians, the Babylonians and the Persians, they had been on the receiving end of unjust emperors and kings. And so for them to imagine God as a sort of vindicating, conquering king, that helped to sustain them. It gave them hope and inspiration during their times of trouble. Of course, for us now in our time and place, we live in America, which kind of is the empire, is the colonizing king, the conquering king. So as some scholars suggest, that traditional image of God, the old white guy sitting on a throne, the emperor, the colonizing king, it's not really a wise image for us anymore in our time and place. I remember doing a small group for some people suffering from substance abuse, and one of the women had been abused by her father, and she said, I can never think of God as Father. And God the Father is something most people grow up thinking is a traditional image, but for her, it brought pain and suffering, and so she had to conceive of a different image for God. Perhaps the image portrayed in the movie The Shack, the sort of heavy-set African-American woman, probably would have worked a lot better for her. And so I think this, reflecting on this passage in Daniel, perhaps we might break free of some of our traditional images of God and come to the conclusion that the image of God we need is whatever works for us, whatever we need God to be. Amen.